Hey everyone, welcome to The New Populist. I'm Dave Brown. If you're new to this channel, please like and subscribe. If you missed it, we had Climate Change Night, where all the late night talk shows banded together to talk about the issue of climate change. And they had this really nice promotional photo. And to them, it's just 7 comedians getting together to talk about this issue, but I see things differently. I see 4 major corporations having their well-paid ventriloquist repeat the talking points about climate change as they're paid to do. And if you have seen some of my videos on the Great Reset, then you would know that climate change is a key part of the Great Reset. And it's for this reason. At some point, although it may not seem like it, the pandemic will come to an end and we will have something of normalcy back in our lives. Will that be 6 months from now, 2 years from now? I don't know. Of course, unfortunately, some of these new powers that the government has gotten because of the pandemic, they'll hold on to. We all know that. Whatever the government gets, it does not give back. But at some point, things will move on and they will need a new boogeyman to use to coerce us to give up our freedoms and liberties and to give them more power in our lives. And the vehicle for that is climate change. And of course, Klaus Schwab wrote about this in his book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. And I want to go back and reread a couple of things that he said, because this will really illuminate a lot of the things that these late night comedians said during their broadcast. He says, while for a pandemic, a majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks where the evidence can be disputed. He goes on, an outbreak threatens our survival as individuals or a species, and we therefore respond immediately with determination when faced with the risk. By contrast, climate change and natural loss are gradual and cumulative, with effects that are discernible mostly in the medium and long term. And despite more and more climate-related and exceptional nature loss events, there are still significant numbers who remain unconvinced of the immediacy of the climate crisis. So the pandemic, we all see the risk. It's right there in front of us. We see the positive tests, the ERs and ICUs that are overflowing. And because of that, the government says, okay, people are scared. We can implement what we want to implement. But with climate change, the effects aren't so obvious. It isn't immediate. So one of the things that they're trying to do now is to convince us that the threat of climate change is grave and it's happening right now, not in the near future. Your life is at risk as we speak if we do not take immediate action. And if you watch their shows, they had these, all these images they showed of wildfires, the winter storm in Texas, Northeast flooding, all these images to make you scared. And this one on Kimmel was I think the best one here. Code Red for Humanity, obviously referring to the Code Red from the Tom Cruise movie. And so I think that really shows you right there. That's their image to you. It's a code red. It's right now. You're at risk. Changes need to happen. And the other thing that climate change offers that the pandemic doesn't, and this is actually an important thing here, is that, like I said before, the pandemic comes to an end. But the climate change crisis, it's as described here in the Intelligencer, a permanent emergency. So think about that. If they can convince you that the threat is immediate and it's permanent, then the changes they want to make and the coercive actions will be done in perpetuity, not for a year, not for 10 years, not for 20 years. It will be forever. We'll be in this constant state of agitation, in this constant emergency where the government needs to take new and coercive actions to fight climate change. And if they can scare you enough, then they can hopefully, in their point of view, convince you that we should accept this. And the funny thing is that, both sides always do this, where there's an event and they point to that as being evidence for or against climate change. When there's a huge snowstorm, Republicans go outside and go, look at the snowstorm, the climate change isn't happening. And then people could point out, rightly so, that you can't point to a specific weather event to prove or disprove climate change. Or can you? Because now the left is pointing to these events as evidence of climate change. So as usual, when the right does something, you're idiots, we're not following the science. When the left does it the exact same thing, all of a sudden it's acceptable and you're following the science. And even Klaus Schwab said this in his book. He says, often scientists cannot point to a direct link of causation between climate change and a specific weather event, like a drought or the severity of a hurricane. And he's right, you can't. And so now we see these comedians on TV pointing to the wildfires and the floods and everything as cause for climate change. But you know what? If we go back in time, there were severe weather events 100 years ago, 150 years ago. We had a Knickerbocker snowstorm where building collapsed, the Knickerbocker building, I think it was called. Hope I got that right. Some building collapsed, I think in New York. We had floodings in the Northeast back in the 60s where, Dayton, Ohio was underwater. So we can always, point to these extreme weather events in all points in history. And to point to one event as being showing climate change is happening is idiotic. And another thing I think we had to point out too, we look at things like the wildfires, for example, and we blame climate change. And we don't blame the fact that we have 50 million people living in a state where it doesn't rain 6 months out of the year, where people are having campfires, they're throwing cigarette butts out the window. So is climate change causing wildfires, or is it the fact that we're living here, overpopulated in a state where it doesn't rain? We point to Hurricane Katrina as being caused by climate change, and I'm going, hold on, we built a city below sea level in the Gulf of Mexico in a place where there are frequent hurricanes, and then we're surprised when it gets flooded and underwater. New York City, we built a subway system next to the coast, below the sea level, and of course, when it floods, what happens? The water goes into the subway tunnels. So a lot of the things that we experience, these disasters, aren't necessarily climate change. It's that we build things and our human activity puts us at risk for things happening. We talk about it all the time with tornadoes. Why do you have a mobile home in Kansas, for Christ's sake, in these tornado alley? So a lot of these destructive events are, unfortunately, our own fault. The last thing I want to talk about too is the issue of climate change in general. And one of the traps that we fall into on the right is the left creates this situation where there's two sides. There's their side, and then there's the side of the idiots. And we see this with COVID. You have either you believe in the vaccine and you believe COVID is a terrible disease, or you think the vaccine is poison and that COVID is overblown. And the real answer is it's neither camp. Most answers are always more nuanced, and that is the same for climate change. The climate is changing. That is 100% true. We as human beings have an effect on the climate. The question is, to what degree do we impact the environment? Now, on the right, someone like myself, I say we impact it, but not as much as they say we do. And of course, if you're on the left, you think that everything that bad happens is because of human activity. Again, the actual answer is somewhere in between. And I point to a lot of the prognostications made by the experts about climate, and a lot of them have not come true. They predicted that snow would vanish on Kilimanjaro by 2020. Well, it's still there. I think Al Gore made that. He said the polar ice caps would disappear within 5 years. Of course, that didn't happen. And so you have all of these prognostications that are made that don't pan out. And so I go, hold on. If we're basing our economic model of what we're going to do in the future based off of their prognostications, we're in trouble because they've been wrong. Yeah, we're going to give up all this money, all these rights for something that may not actually happen. So that's where I come from. That's why I go, okay, we can do things, but not based off what you're saying as far as your modeling in the future. If we're going off that, it's way off. I don't think that's a good thing to follow, especially when we're doing things that will affect the entire planet as far as how we live and our freedoms and our ability to, manufacture and have a high quality of life. That scares me. A second thing is that they often point to different studies showing that if we do A, B, or C, we will benefit from it. It won't cost us any money. In fact, it will save us money. And one of the comedians, he pointed to a study read by Chris Hayes on MSNBC, a knucklehead. And the study says, compared to continuing with a fossil fuel-based system, a rapid green energy transition will likely result in overall net savings of many trillions of dollars, even without accounting for climate damages or co-benefits of climate policy. Well, the key word there is likely. So even here, it's just a guess. Well, we think. And where have we seen this before? With other government programs or other government interventions where they said, oh, it won't cost us any money. It'll actually save us money in the long run. Social Security, just for one, what's our national debt right now? How many times have we passed an economic package where they promised us that it wouldn't cost us any money, and in the long term, it would save us money? Are you going to fall for that one again? For Christ's sakes, they've been wrong a million times when it comes to their prognostications about these budgetary actions and these packages that go through Congress. They're supposed to be for our benefit. Yet every single freaking time, it costs us more money, and it's an absolute disaster. And it's usually just a payoff to a bunch of companies and organizations that support certain politicians. That's what it usually is. So here they're talking about saving trillions of dollars. We're not going to save trillions of dollars, but somebody is going to get trillions of dollars, just not me or you. So whatever they're proposing here as far as climate change, the Green New Deal, these are not net benefits for us, the people. It is nothing more than a transfer of money and power. And I think we all know that. So going forward, we know they're going to focus on climate change as their next vehicle for their totalitarian agenda. At some point, I guess right now, they will pivot away from the coronavirus and the pandemic, and it'll slide right into climate change. So be prepared for that. That's coming right now. They're teaming up, and they're ramping up their propaganda in full force. That's it for now. Again, if you're new to this channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.